Hello, I think we're live. This is Johannes Freyhoff. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this second panel of our series, Innovation in Biotech in the Time of COVID-19. I'm thrilled to have join me this afternoon three excellent panelists from our world. You see here joining us Jo Viney. She's the co-founder and president of Pandion Therapeutics and also leads their science. And Pandion is one of our Lab Central based companies that I think they're just moving out. Jo, you'll give us a quick update on that. Formerly, Jo was also at Biogen and at Amgen and Immunex, and she's an immunologist with an important perspective, of course, on the current COVID crisis. And I'm also joined by two prominent venture capitalists investing in companies in our space. Sarah Naeem, she's a partner with NEA in DC, and also Kevin Bitterman, partner with Atlas Venture and serial founder here in the Boston ecosystem. With that, we can go to the live view. Can we see everybody? Yes. Very good. Nice to see you guys. Thank you for joining us. The format for the audience, the format this afternoon is going to be a quick 45-minute webinar that we'll start with a few questions and banter from the panelists for a few minutes, and then I think for the last 15 minutes of the time that we have allocated, the team has the ability to take audience questions and they'll channel them to me. So you can use the link that's provided in your invite and ask questions of the audience, of the panel. And this way we can share and jointly sort of hopefully develop a good discussion that's valuable for everybody. And we'll be wrapped up at 2:15, so you don't lose a lot of your lovely spring afternoon here. Let me get started and start with Jo. Maybe, Jo, you guys have just completed your move, or you're still at Lab Central or in the process of moving out. Can you give us a quick overview of, first of all, Pandion, your current company, and also how you have responded in this crisis? How have you restructured your team? Or are you doing business as usual? Just to get a view from a practitioner of innovation in this time.
Yeah, thanks, Johannes. Thanks for that introduction. So we were planned actually to be fully moved out of Lab Central by now. I think we're about 98% moved out, but we got a little bit thwarted and had to leave a couple of pieces of equipment there. But maybe I can tell you a little bit about Pandion. So we are a company that's just had its third birthday. We are an autoimmune disease company focused on making bifunctional biologics. And our goal is to use or stimulate the body's natural regulatory mechanisms for dampening down overactive immune responses. And we aim to do that with a platform that can deliver those therapies either systemically or locally to different tissues. And so that's part of the bifunctional format that we have. We have the ability to create molecules that dock our immune effectors in the organ where there's inflammation. So that's the thesis behind the company. We grew up at Lab Central. We started out with just one bench, and we graduated through a couple of the little labs in 700, and then we've spent our last year in one of the teenage labs at 610. And we've grown from being just me and a blank piece of paper to having just over 30 odd people now, and with interns we're close to 40. So that's what prompted our move out of Lab Central into our own space in Watertown. So timing wise, we couldn't have picked a better time for our move. It was planned for the week that the shelter in home came about. So we were half packed up and we put a little pause on things. But it became clear that biotech being an essential business, we were able to continue our move. And so actually we are almost fully moved in now. I'm surrounded by people who are already doing lab work. We completed the rest of our move last week. And Johannes, you asked me to talk about what are we doing for business continuity. So we made we had a lot of discussion about, should we pause everything? Should we try and keep going? And we've decided to divide our company into two teams, orange team and blue team, which are our company colors. And we have split the functional groups in half so that we have half the immunologists, half the protein engineers in for the blue team and the other half for the orange team. And we have decided to go with a 2-week on, 2-week off rota. So 2 weeks in the lab and then 2 weeks data analysis and remote working. And the rationale behind that was to minimize the possibility of cross-contaminating between teams. So I know a lot of different companies have got shift work going on. Some are doing alternate days, some are doing morning and afternoon shifts. And we chose to have the extended period because we wanted intense time in the lab, but we also wanted time for any potential viral droplets to be cleared over a weekend before bringing in the next team. So we are not quite business as usual, but we're not far off.
In terms of making progress against timelines that you promised to your investors, I know that's a big concern with many of the startups that we have in the space. And of course, Pandion is in the enviable position to have recently, I think you recently disclosed your second major round of financing. So you probably have enough money in the bank to tide you over this current crisis. But again, that budget was written while assuming a certain level of productivity. Are you seeing that go forward? Are you seeing missed timelines in your future? What's your view on that?
Yeah, so we have a lot of our work is in-house, and so we're not so dependent on some of the CROs that closed down operations or have slowed operations. So right now our timelines are still looking on track. We do have a couple of areas where we're keeping our close eye on making sure that we ensure business continuity. But as of now, we have not seen a slip in our timeline. And I do think it's really important that, yes, you're right, we were thrilled to close our Series B just last month. And so we do have money in the bank, but we have deliverables, we have timelines to meet. And so it's important not to spend the money and let those timelines peter off into the distance. So that's why we've taken this approach of trying to ensure that we have business continuity. We spent a lot of time thinking about, if we were to close, what would it take to restart the business? And it was clear early on that we don't really know when we're going to be back to business as usual. And so we felt that we would take these steps so that we could keep the work going. And so we've got very collaborative teams here. So, people normally work on their own project. Right now, we have people who are leading projects and a lot of different people are helping out. And so those teams that are in are actually working pretty long hours. So they're doing more than their regular duty, but that's so that we can keep track of our timelines. So it is really important to keep an eye on that. We're all, whether you have a lot of money in the bank or a little money in the bank, we're all very dependent on delivering what we're expected to deliver for our investors.
Sarah, you invest in many life science companies across the country and also with many different maturity stages. How are you informing, how are you advising your portfolio companies to prepare for this? Or what do you see as an effective response that company leaders are adopting to get through this?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it depends a lot on the stage of the company. So to give an example, a very early stage cancer, targeted cancer therapeutics company that I'm on the board of, they have at least 2 CROs in the Wuhan area and another one in China. And very early on, back in January when we met as a board, back when people were still traveling, they had already started to put in place going to alternative CROs. Now, they actually found a couple that were in Europe that, also, could potentially then later realize have some disruptions. But also CRO in Canada, and just looking at alternate plans. So they're such a new company, still like a stealth mode company, that they, I would say that a couple of months of some delays, but, relatively quickly were able to get the molecules they had ordered from China and start get things going in their own lab. And now, it's a California-based company, so experiencing, some of this changing of the guard in terms of actually having people in the lab. That's contrasted with some of our companies that are clinical stage, and I think those are the hardest, the most challenging, especially if they're in pivotal stage trials where there's a lot riding on them. They're in a big enrollment phase. So everyone is sort of taking a step back and looking at how is their enrollment going to change over time? What are some mitigation steps that they can put into place? For instance, some patients who might have been getting drug from their clinician's office, they're finding ways to deliver directly to the home. There are even some measures that can be done in the home, but then you have to recognize that those will probably be more variable, and the FDA may or may not look as favorably upon data that's collected in the home, and maybe not as consistent with the rest of the trial, and could affect the trial results. Maybe it'll be hard. We'll have to see how everything shakes out, and people look back and say, okay, well, this is how we manage this trial and data accruement and doing what we can. This is something like going to someone's house and picking up a 24-hour urine sample, pretty easy. May not be quite as functional or foolproof as doing it in the office, but doing a 6-minute walk test at someone's home is going to be much different than having done it in the office. So, but I think companies are really on a case-by-case basis, looking at all of their different sites, trying to determine which ones are going to have the biggest lag. And I think companies should put into place, revising them to think through what are the thresholds you need. So for instance, a company that was on the cusp of launching a phase 2 study, what % of their sites do they need to see up and running again in terms of actually doing clinical trial work before they start that trial, because it'll, the longer they're enrolling, the longer the burn starts to ramp up, et cetera. So I think that's really important to think about. How will we know when we're ready to start a study, or how will we handle this delay, that delay, not being able to get the data? And a lot of these decisions are being made real time. And then in addition to stage, there's also the question of where is the company in the financing process. A lot of our public companies, they generally, we went through and evaluated our whole portfolio. Most of them have more than a year of cash, and they're in pretty good shape. But a lot of our companies that are still private are in the midst of financing, or just starting financings, and that's more challenging, especially those that are sort of earlier in the process. I think a lot of companies where there was already a term sheet generated before the things really got challenging with COVID-19, those are largely being honored. But I think for really new financings, people are taking meetings. But I think, and Kevin can comment too, it seems like that is there is definitely going to be a period of time where that's kind of all that's happening, is people taking meetings and doing some diligence, but waiting to see how things play out. And again, particularly any companies that have some clinical trial risk, that are later stage. So some companies have gone to the step of furloughing people, thinking about RIFs. We definitely, are a diversified fund. So on our tech side, there's been, the revenue generating companies have had to act more aggressively and been impacted more quickly. So, and I think it's really a company by company process. And we can talk about the payroll protection plan as well if you want a little bit later. But, everyone is taking a look at that and trying to figure out, is the juice worth the squeeze? And also, can they justify taking the capital based on how affected they are by COVID-19 and the situation that each company's in.
We were talking about that with a bunch of VCs recently, and heard that many are counseling venture funded companies against that. But again, I think that's sort of a case by case situation. I'd be interested, Kevin, in your perspective. You invest a lot in early stage companies. Atlas is very actively also creating companies. If I'm an entrepreneur today and I was hoping to launch my new idea, my new startup in the spring of 2020, it's bad, right? Like, what is that? Is that my misunderstanding of the situation, or is Atlas actually looking at new opportunities right now? What is the overall sense there?
Yeah, for sure. And, as Sarah said, in some ways, the world's kind of turned on its head right now. And the earlier you are, the farther you are from having to worry about getting patients to show up at the clinic to get dosed with your therapy, the better. So from an early stage perspective, we're absolutely working on just as many deals as we normally would. We've got a couple of new EIRs that just joined us, and we're rolling up our sleeves, putting things together with them. At the same time, it's sort of foolish to pretend it's business as usual. So for our existing companies, whether we're starting something new, we're taking a mindset that in many ways we had through the boom era, but really doubling down, and the fundamentals of capital efficiency, making sure the company stays agile, making sure you're building in all the redundancy plans as folks talked about. But the other element in terms of what we're doing with our companies, and especially from an early stage, when I think investors need to be thinking about right now. You said to Joe before, you have all these timelines that you promised to your investors. This situation is completely unprecedented, and there's so much out of the control of these companies. Most people very appropriately are focused on this new reality of dealing with childcare and home education, and navigating the situation to find their way to work. And then on top of that, having to worry about sticking to these timelines. In some sense, our job right now is to just let the companies know, we've got your back. We realize that a ton of this is out of your control, that there's this incredible, unprecedented level of personal stress that we're all feeling. So, making sure that companies are still able to make progress on the capital that they have, but also, companies that have robust syndicates and hopefully, good investors behind them will be completely understanding that, this is a new reality where there may be some shift to timelines that are, again, completely out of everyone's control. So we're having those conversations with our companies to try to diffuse some of that tension and stress and let people focus on things that are most important right now.
Naturally, the pre-existing projects are on the rocks, and may be difficult to continue or to complete in time. At the same time, this also, of course, creates new opportunity. Some of our companies have indeed pivoted or added a program to, I know of a diagnostic company that is a recent graduate from Lab Central that are now making a test that's used at the Brigham as a rapid test for PCR-based viral discovery. Are you reviewing your portfolio, and is this even something that VCs would encourage, or is that a distraction of the original mission? Do you allow them to sort of use their creativity? And maybe that goes back to Kevin. Do you allow them to use and apply their creativity to solve this problem for us, or is that not permitted?
No, of course, it's certainly encouraged. And there's a number of our companies, and I'm sure in Sarah's portfolio as well, we have so many platform opportunities where the ability to pivot this and, address a near-term need like COVID-19 is extraordinary. And it would be almost criminal not to pursue that. So no, absolutely, we're encouraging it where it makes sense. Of course, there's an incredible amount of work already going on in the space. So you want to make sure the company truly has a unique, potentially impactful angle that can be realized, in a realistic amount of time. But we're seeing a lot of that, and I think it's sort of the beauty of this industry to be able to, as rapidly as we have as many vaccines and potential therapeutics and diagnostics in development. It's really extraordinary to see.
I think this hits on a topic that is also interesting to discuss in this group of investors and practitioners of innovation, is that it wasn't really an investable proposition to invest in vaccine development startups or to invest in infectious disease therapeutics, be they antivirals or be they antibiotics especially. And that maybe that's an open question to the whole panel. Do you see that shift in this world? Do you think that we may find ways to invest and make a profit of investing in infectious diseases, with this now being a scare that hits all of our society? Or are we going to go back to the old ways of just curing the rare diseases and of the world?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I'm not going to speak about your return on investment and whether we should be investing in companies, but I think it speaks to the importance of the need for vaccines and the need for thinking about infectious disease. I think there has been a trend focused on rare diseases, but this hits home, right? This is affecting all of us, and I don't think we should overlook the importance of having at hand vaccines that protect broad swaths of the population, or therapeutics that can treat infectious disease. And I'll let the other two comment on returns on investment.
Well, I mean, there are only a handful of venture-backed vaccine companies that I've come across in my time, because it's, it's such a challenging undertaking. You need to treat so many people, and of course, the safety hurdles are extraordinarily high. So one of the reasons why there's a lot of investment in oncology and rare diseases is, there's a lower safety hurdle. Science is moving. There's a potential to cure diseases that, there's nothing for right now. So, going into a vaccine strategy is often a place where there are already multiple vaccines, and can be a little challenging to fund in a venture-backed environment. But I think the broader question of just anti-infectives and how we think about them, I do think this will change the way that the field and government politicians think about it. I think there'll probably be more creativity, more looking at programs and ways to, particularly in the antibacterial world, where there are just challenges with how hospitals pay for those and utilize them. Stockpiling, thinking about stockpiling more. And one thing that Scott Gottlieb, and maybe we'll talk about him a little more in a few minutes, but he's a special partner at NEA as well as former FDA commissioner, and he's pushed a lot, saying whatever the 3 or 4 or 5 most promising therapies here, Congress should really be working with them. Lawmakers should be working with those manufacturers to figure out how can they expedite the process to the FDA and get manufacturing up and running. Even if we don't know that they're working it, you kind of have to start manufacturing for all of the most promising therapies in parallel, just to save all of these lives. So I think there'll be more attention to that. And I also see, there is a lot of rhetoric out there about not worry that pharma companies will profit off of this pandemic. And several companies have talked about giving, whether it's Gilead or Novartis, different therapies at cost or for free, and that they won't profit off of it. But in the long term, beyond this COVID-19 pandemic, generally treating diseases, there does need to be a profit incentive. We can't, just say, okay, well, pharma shouldn't profit off of any, infectious diseases. That will get us back to where we were, where there's really no incentives for the private market. So I think it's really a balance of, realizing that companies should be incentivized to innovate and to ramp up production of things and ramp up trials at risk. And they haven't really been, anti-infectives haven't made for great investments in many cases in the past. And just recognizing this big opportunity to really impact human health, and maybe biopharma can improve their standing in the world, their reputation a little bit, by acting ethically in this situation.
Yeah, I would only add very quickly. I mean, it's unfortunate that it takes something like this to get everyone's attention. And, ironically, the only reason that we have remdesivir from Gilead is because of Ebola, right? Another horrible outbreak that got the world's attention. So perhaps this has been of the magnitude that there will be a significant shift. I think, antivirals, there's always been some very large franchises in. Whether this trickles into antibiotics and can sort of catalyze some increased activity in that space, I'm a little skeptical, but certainly hopeful that that is the case, given the need there as well.
Sarah, you mentioned Scott Gottlieb, who's one of my heroes, of course, on Twitter. He's one of these sources of sane information, and has been a source of warning and caution since the beginning of the year, when they foresee that this will just a wave that's coming our way, when others were just denying this to be true. So now you sit in, I imagine, in your partners meetings close to that, and you get a healthy dose of that every week. How are you using that insight for your own family to inform your portfolio companies?
Yeah, no, it's great being able to, get exposed to Scott's viewpoints, both, via his public communications and just in these, partner meetings when he's the highlight when when we get updates from him. I think part of NEA's sort of rapid response, we were one of the first out there to, before other firms, it seemed like to me, to say, stop traveling, don't, we had some folks who were coming back from Europe and they got caught in an early NEA policy that said if you're coming back from anywhere outside the US, you need to self-quarantine or stay out of the office for 2 weeks. So several people were actually in Europe when that was announced. And at the time, it seemed like we were ahead of, where other people were. And I think a lot of that had to do with Scott and his ability to, just vocalize what we were likely to be up against. And since then, it's been, a real privilege being able to see his leadership in the space and talking particularly about this, roadmap for reopening the economy, just, and getting his views again on things like, one of the things we really need to be doing is thinking about manufacturing and making sure that we have enough of these therapies, even if we lose money because the government has helped fund manufacturing of several different, therapies at the same time. Not all of them will work. It's still worth it in this situation. And his ability to galvanize the political community and just be a strong voice out there, just seeing where we have limitations and where we need to do more, both to get data out there, testing. He was one of the first that was saying, there is evidence for wearing masks, even though of course they want to minimize use of medical masks for people. And now, we're starting to see that tide turn, and there being guidance out there about wearing masks. So, I think he's doing great work out there, and even with some of our portfolio companies, because I was, part of that conversation and had been watching his Twitter feed and paying attention to it, advising some of them early on in the Boston area to, have work from home, not, I would tell your grandmother, don't travel to her, on her trip to Italy right now, as that country started to erupt with cases. So it's been a privilege getting a chance to be connected with him through this.
Great. I'm starting to see on my feed here the questions that are coming in from the audience. Here's one that's very practical and affects some of our companies directly, and maybe we'll invite Joe's perspective there. I don't know, Joe, if Pandion, this is about the PPP and the money is made available from the SBA to help out small businesses right now. And I don't know what Pandion's situation is, but here's a question that says, is it ethical for loss-making venture-backed companies to be pursuing SBA relief mechanisms? Most of our venture-backed companies, of course, are making losses. So as such, they would be theoretically qualified. I know that some of the big venture firms, including NEA and Atlas, have taken strong positions to say, no, we don't want our companies applying for that. Or maybe the question goes out to all of you. How do you recommend going about this?
Yeah, I can say that so there's a network of CEOs who meet weekly, and many of us have joined those calls, and I would say there's been a lot of conversation about the intent to apply for the stimulus relief. I think a small number of companies have, but it certainly hasn't been the majority. I don't know, Kevin, I think you have got some insight into that as well.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty significant shift in tone on that over the last couple of weeks. And initially, when everyone saw the government's giving out $250 billion, of course, let's mobilize and let's apply and let's get funding into our portfolio companies during this troubling time. I think everyone sort of let it and the broader sort of environment sit in. The first sort of battle was this affiliate rule, and our companies ruled out because they have investors and what are the number of employees, and everyone worked through the legality of that, and that is on a firm by firm basis. All of Atlas's companies ended up qualifying for that. The bigger issue was this idea of whether the loan is absolutely essential for continued operations. And I think when you take a step back, the purpose of this bill really was to help the small businesses in this country that have no recourse to additional funding, that are immediately looking at laying off staff, and are facing an existential event here. And it's really hard for a lot of our companies, not all, but most of our companies, to pass the red face test with either millions of dollars in the bank or deep-pocketed venture capitalists behind them. So to make a long story short, as a firm, we came to the position that we were not going to encourage our companies. We thought more from an ethical standpoint, it wasn't the spirit of the bill. But there certainly are cases of companies that are in very challenging positions right now, with potentially very old syndicates, limited access to funding, and they do face a situation where they might have to do some significant layoffs. And so certainly, we left it up to the companies on a case-by-case basis. Most chose not to apply.
Yeah, and I'd say it's very similar to NEA. It's on a case-by-case basis, but it's really this is the payroll protection, plan or act. So are you protecting payroll by taking this capital? And we don't want companies taking this cash and then going and raising, $50-70 million financings, shortly thereafter. So and that's where it gets tricky, because there are some companies who are in challenging financing situations. So I personally try to think about it as, is this company already doing anything with furloughing employees? Is that something that they're likely to do? The other thing is, you don't have to have the loan be forgiven. You can pay it back. There are some steps where companies can go ahead and apply, and then in some cases there's not a confirmation step, depending on the bank, of whether or not you agree that you will take the money. But some banks will, there's a period where you can say, okay, we don't need it after all, we got our financing done, or but definitely could pay it back. But I think that is really, it's really a question of, if you're taking this capital, are you protecting people's jobs by doing it? So, and if you do that, then you probably shouldn't be doing a Napa Valley firm offsite in the unless you're already in Napa Valley. But and some of our companies would do things like that. They haven't taken raises they had raises approved for 2020, but they haven't put them in place. Or maybe companies might go back to 2019 salaries. And if people feel that doing that, and the management can honestly say, by going back to the salaries you had last year, that makes people more comfortable because they have more job security, then that does say something about whether or not jobs are at risk. So it really is, I think, a case-by-case basis, and being cognizant of just the financing environment, but also the potential that they could get financings done, and then you don't want, then you'd want to pay it back right away.
Thank you. I think that's very good perspective from all of you. I have another question here that seems relevant. Maybe Kevin can answer this. Are we likely to see an uptick in partnership and M&A as larger companies with healthy balance sheets and access to cheap capital start to get opportunistic, and with some of the venture funded companies maybe in dire straits because they can't raise new money?
Yeah, you would certainly hope so. I'm not sure I can necessarily read the tea leaves at this point, though. But certainly there's a lot of depressed valuations out there, certainly publicly, and it'll take some time, but that will trickle down into the private markets as well. So you would imagine that that there are going to be buyers out there on the pharma side, and certainly we're encouraging companies to have those discussions, not just M&A discussions, but partnering discussions that can bring in significant capital to help in an environment where every little bit of extra runway could be incredibly useful. So that is a hope, that during this period you see pharma companies be opportunistic, both on the partnering and potentially on the acquisition side.
Do you, and the follow-up, sort of a follow-up question to that, do you, the VCs, but also you, Joe, as a an entrepreneur who's raising money, do you see the pandemic impacting venture valuations and licensing and M&A activities? Is this other question going forward?
Yeah, I'll answer it quick, Joe, and then hand it over to you. I think somewhat, but I think it's going to take a while in the private markets for that to trickle down. There's an enormous amount of capital out there, and it's not going to dry up overnight. We, of course, all saw several billion-dollar funds getting raised in the last few weeks. We've seen more IPOs get done in the past couple of weeks and all of 2008. And I think, that speaks more, or I should say that speaks less to how severe the economic downturn is going to be because of the pandemic as compared to the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, because I think this actually has a good chance of being quite a bit worse. I think it's more the fundamentals of the biotech market are very, very different right now. There's just more specialized investors. There's more capital out there. There's just different dynamics in the marketplace to be able to support these companies. But again, I think this will take some time, and you will see that capital probably getting funneled into fewer companies, into more experienced entrepreneurs. And ultimately, I think you will see probably an impact on valuations longer term, but I don't think you're going to see that immediately.
Yeah, I think Kevin, I would echo what you've said. I think it's been an interesting month or so. We've moved very quickly, but so far we haven't really seen any major left turns or right turns in terms of financings. But I think more to come. It depends how long we're in this situation.
Yeah, and I do think that many of us felt that we were somewhat in a bubble in the last few years in terms of some of the valuations. And, if you look at the oncology market, I've seen some interesting analyses by bankers of what type of probability of success is being implied based on valuations for companies with, based on their pipelines. And, it was out of whack with the reality of the success rates of those pipelines, or in some cases, just how many different projects going after the same target, are being valued at quite high levels. And we all know, the immuno-oncology space is, an example of where there's been a proliferation of many different programs going after the same targets. But that some of that might come back to earth, and may be somewhat COVID related, but it may also be just the market taking the opportunity to, kind of deflate the bubble a bit. And, I don't think it's a bad thing. We are all like wondering how long, the immense level of excitement, enthusiasm, and, and in some cases hype would last. So, I think as long as the field continues to, advance really exciting science, new platforms, new targets, new ways of doing clinical trials that are more efficient and effective, it'll continue to be a really, a booming industry. And I do think this crisis has also maybe made people rethink how aggressively they were talking about drug pricing, and some of the legislation that was coming down the pike that was very worrisome, sort of blunt force for the industry. I think that'll still be a factor once we come out of this, but hopefully there'll be, this has been an important moment to think about how important the industry is and not squashing innovation unnecessarily.
Yeah, both of us have been quite vocal and involved in sort of warning about those questions. I think it is an opportunity for our industry to now demonstrate that we're not just the bad guys, right? To not be painted like the oil industry or the big tobacco. That this industry of innovation and drug development can actually help our society to find a way out of that. I would just wish that we find the right leaders for that, and to use the right words, so that it's not so easy for the populists to paint us with a greedy brush in the near term. So it'll require some careful balancing here. I'd love to end on some positive take-homes. I'm sure we can all, I've certainly learned to embrace new tools for this. I've seen in my own teams some people that I might have overlooked step up enormously, you know, now that there is this crisis, and the challenge that gave some of them opportunity to you know, grab a new task and step up. What are some of the things that you've seen come out of this crisis that you're going to stick with after, hopefully we'll go back to some semblance of normal soon?
I'm going to keep wearing sweatpants to work. That's.
Oh my gosh.
No, I think you know, Johannes, I think there's some wonderful anecdotes, as you note, coming out of our companies, the incredible acrobatics that they've had to do to keep certain programs on track. There's a sort of this interesting type of bonding that's happened through this crisis, even though it's happening remotely. Although in, you know, some cases, people that are still going into the labs. I'm just hearing from CEOs just really wonderful stories of the team gelling, and these sort of new cultural elements that are emerging over this time. And I think, you know, a lot of that will carry over. And I think, frankly, a lot of lessons on, again, coming back to the fundamentals of, you know, how to build any company, not just biotech. We've been in this just unbelievably extended period of frothiness in biotech, and you know, we're going to get back to, I think, a little bit of you know, healthy starvation, perhaps, that'll be good for the industry. But you know, I think that the job of an investor is probably to be, you know, pessimistic in bad times, and optimistic or excuse me, pessimistic in really good times and optimistic in really bad times. So you know, we're hopeful that the industry is going to come out of this more strongly.
Yeah, I have two takeaways. I think for me, this is, as a woman in science and someone who's passionate about supporting the careers of women in science, I think it's been a big wake-up call to everyone about the flexibility that we need with scheduling. And I think everyone's been experiencing the necessity of ensuring that not everyone can be available, and how do we figure out how to meet and to do our business, and it doesn't have to be in the traditional face-to-face during office hours, 9 to 5. So that's one big takeaway, is that I'd like to see that continue, this consideration for different ways of working. And then my other big takeaway is, I think this has been a time where we're seeing a lot of innovation. And so there's innovation with trying to think about new therapies and new vaccines to treat COVID-19 patients, but also in other areas of science. We've got people who are thinking differently. They're working on different programs together in a more collaborative manner. Some things are moving more quickly, and people have got some time to think when we're not busy rushing from meeting to meeting in the office. There has been opportunity for individuals to mix and match, share ideas, brainstorm, and come up with new innovations and new ideas. So I think those will be the two takeaways for me from this situation.
Yeah, and I would just add communication, because I think through this crisis, our management teams have been working so much more closely with their investors and board members, and you know, even as teams thinking about scenario planning and risk mitigation, and just, you know, really needing to be 100% in sync there, and that's, I think, a trend I hope will continue. And then also, hopefully, people will not you know, will recognize when they need to travel versus when they don't need to travel. I mean, I think one of the likelihoods, you know, you hear people like Scott Gottlieb saying, everything's not going to snap back to the way it was immediately. So there will be a lot more people on the margin who will say, yeah, maybe I won't go to that concert, or maybe I don't need to maybe I can put getting my haircut another week. And we see that in China. Some of that might be financial related, but a lot of it is still, you know, there will be some fear of contracting the virus. So that will also impact how we travel in the biopharma industry. There's always been, you know, just a massive amount of going to boards, going to conferences. And, you know, I think, you know, maybe better for people's lifestyle and health if we pick and choose a little bit more and use this format more to, you know, to communicate. We're obviously getting a lot better at it. So a lot of people who never would do video chat in the past, they finally, you know, come to adopt it and do the fancy backgrounds and everything too. So
it's all
yeah, we're learning.
I think that would be a wonderful take home from this crisis. I hear that air traffic is down like 95%. Yay! That's really awesome. I want to thank you all that you joined us for this 45 minutes. It's great to have your insights. It's really wonderful to hear from your different perspectives, how you responded, how your companies are responding, and how you're preparing for the next weeks. Thank you again. I'm sure that the audience greatly enjoyed this. This will be available on YouTube as well, and we've seen quite a bit of uptake in the YouTube activity for the past seminars. So hopefully you can share this link with your own friends and colleagues as well. And maybe you will all choose to tune in to our upcoming seminars as well. We have the next one coming up next Tuesday at 1:30, when we will have two physicians and an entrepreneur describe sort of from the front lines in the hospitals. We have an ER physician and we have an infectious disease doc, and we have one of our entrepreneurs working on vaccines for COVID. So hopefully we can see you all back then for this. With this one, I want to close this afternoon session. Thanks again to the panel, and see you all soon. Stay healthy.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.